إن الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على حبيب المصطفى وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى من اتبع الهدى أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. Okay, so let's begin now. So Alhamdulillah, Sheikh Mufti Saif al-Islam Sahib has already enlightened us with the spirituality of the month of Ramadan, and I do hope that everybody did benefit from Mufti Saab's speech. It has been recorded, but then it has to go through some the process of editing. Once again, I do apologize for any mishaps or disruptions from individuals or external members, and for people just to for annotating. But I have disabled all that now, so hopefully we shouldn't have any problems. So in any case, so we're going to be talking about some of the fiqh-related issues to Ramadan. We'll be talking about the fiqh-related issues to Ramadan. We'll be talking about some of the historic pandemics of the of the plague from within our Islamic tradition. And also, we're going to talk about some of the lessons that can be drawn from there, inshallah. So this screen that I've just put up in front of you, if anybody can see, this is our JKN Fatwa website. If you look at the right side is the top view, and the left one is on the top view, and the second one is the right view. On the right one is the bottom view. This is just our JKN Fatwa website, which alhamdulillah has been running for some time now, for a few months. We've had a lot of views, mashallah. We've had many people visiting and giving us good comments. So we've got, as you can see on the right hand side of my screen, we have the Zakat Masterclass video, and all our fiqh videos will be uploaded onto the JKN Fatwa website. Throughout the whole month of Ramadan, I will be producing hopefully small clips related to the fiqh of Ramadan, and they'll be posted onto the JKN Fatwa website. So all of the detailed rulings related to fiqh of Ramadan, they will be presented in short clips. So we will not be able to cover all of them in this session due to the limited time. However, if you can look at some of our recent queries about giving ghusl to the deceased body who's died of coronavirus, should the masajid be closed, and the issue related to performing Jumu'ah Salah at home, is the issue related to zakat, are disease contagious, and the Islamic stance on the outbreak of coronavirus. All of the details will be presented there. There's another detailed answer that I've just finished writing up, and hopefully it will be available on the website in the next 1 to 2 days. Is about the death committee. A lot of people ask the issue of death committee, that especially now the fact that due to this pandemic, a lot of people are passing away, and now we've lost a lot of our beloved. So therefore, people are now asking about this issue of death committee. Is it permissible or not? I've written a detailed answer on this. It will be posted onto the website hopefully by Monday or Tuesday the latest. So the content is that we will be talking about the historic pandemic. We're going to be talking about why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests people, some important lessons that we can learn from these trials, some coping strategies in light of Islamic guidelines, how to manage one's own stress, because it's a time where a lot of the people, unfortunately, now have become overwhelmed with anxiety, distress. People are losing hope. People are despairing. I mean, subhanallah, right? I'm going on a small of a tangent here, but there's one brother who's been contacting me quite regularly, a Muslim, and he's a very dear friend of mine, and unfortunately now he's thinking of leaving Islam because of this whole pandemic that's been happening. He's now questioning that why Almighty Allah is doing this. If Almighty Allah is so great and is so merciful, then why is he allowing people to suffer? So you see, these kind of doubts or misconceptions about Almighty Allah that are creeping in the hearts of the Muslims. It's causing them to doubt their faith, and what's worse is leaving Islam. So that itself is a whole detailed topic in its own. But I'm just going to present some coping mechanisms that if every person was to follow, if a person was to act upon, or some basic guidelines, then inshallah it will some kind of alleviate the distress, alleviate the anxiety, and make it much more manageable. And then we're going to talk about the fiqh of Ramadan in light of COVID-19, because the fiqh of Ramadan itself is a topic in its own that requires a detailed workshop throughout the whole day. And we're going to focus on three aspects. One is the ill person's fasting in light of COVID-19, then the issues related to Taraweeh Salah and Jummah and Eid Salah. So these are the main topics we're going to be talking about. So in any case, so let's begin. So the historic pandemic. So let's talk about the historic pandemic in the Islamic world. To be clear, that the pandemic that we Muslims are facing today is not something new. This has existed. This pre-existed our time, during the time of the Prophet, just after the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and even before the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam addressed issues related to pandemic illnesses, and the pandemic illness that was rife at that time was called was referred to the ta'un, which is the plague, the infamous plague. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned some hadith related to that. We're going to go into that now. So let's begin. So first thing is, and subhanallah, right, I just wanted to point out one thing, that all the natural questions that arise in our minds and hearts about current challenges, the Sahaba, subhanallah, had already asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for guidance. So regarding, for example, ta'un and plague. So Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, she asked the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding plague, that why is it that Almighty Allah inflicts plague on people? Why does Allah Ta'ala create plague and cause plague to spread? Like in this day and age, we have like the viruses. We had the Black Death, for example. We had the Ebola crisis, for example. We had the swine flu, for example. We had the SARS pandemic that we had many years ago. Now we have the coronavirus, which many people say that is unprecedented. Is unprecedented in one respect, but there are similitude examples of such thing. In fact, worse during in our Islamic history, and we will touch upon that inshallah. So the question is now, whether it be Ebola or whichever virus it may be, whichever form it appears, begs the question that why does Almighty Allah cause these things to happen? So Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, she asks the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding plague, that why do these plague happen? Then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, verily it's a punishment. Innahu adhabun yab'athu Allahu ala man yasha. It is a punishment that Allah Ta'ala sends upon whoever He wishes, on His servants. So the first thing that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, it is an adhab, it is a punishment. But now there's a clause here. The scholars of Islam, they add a clause here. They say when the Prophet ﷺ said that it is a punishment, is because it's a punishment primarily primarily due to our misconduct, due to the evil practice that's prevalent at the time. There's one hadith, and under this hadith in Sahih Bukhari, and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahimahullah, one of the famous commentators of Sahih Bukhari, he states that he comments saying that the reason why it's a punishment primarily due to people disobeying Almighty Allah. And he presents many ahadith in relation to this, but just to summarize, is that the Prophet ﷺ, in one hadith, he mentioned that whenever certain crimes become prevalent within a society, for example, promiscuity, zina, for example, or when it comes to theft, or for example, highway robbery, for example. So these kind of sins that become prevalent amongst a society, then Almighty Allah causes pandemic to thrive, and this is due to our misconduct. Now, this is something that which is not known in the scientific world, because in the scientific world they always examine first-hand situations. So first-hand situations, that's what science, they always examine. But from the Muslim perspective, from a religious perspective, there are certain metaphysical realities. There are certain things that have metaphysical realities which do have an impact, or do affect affect the climate around us. So we believe that a person's deeds and behavior and particular practices, they have an effect on pandemics or natural disasters. Now the question is, you cannot establish this scientifically, but this is something that's enshrined within our faith. Now, what's the rationale behind this? Is because that people of faith, they believe in a higher supreme being. In our case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe in Almighty Allah. Now, the fact that we believe in Almighty Allah, we believe that He is the one that controls the affairs of the world. He controls the affairs of the universe. So the natural disasters, anything that happen, they're all in His control. They happen. They happen under His divine instruction, divine command. And it is Almighty Allah that He is the one that tests people however and whenever He wants. This Lord being Himself, Almighty Allah, has certain demands. The demands that He has is that we worship Him alone and we be good to Him and we obey Him in all matters. And however, if we disobey Him, if we disobey Almighty Allah, then in return, Almighty Allah has the right to punish us, to punish people because of our misdeeds, because of our misconduct. And He does this through natural disasters. So though the scientific world may not be able to explain the metaphysical reality, or may not be able to explain the reality beyond observable things, because they examine observable things, from the faith perspective, we believe that everything happens to the will of Almighty Allah. So I was mentioning that Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahmatullahi mentioned so many things. In fact, I'll just mention a couple of things. I'll just mention a hadith related to this, that there's one Sahabi narrates, I'll just quickly mention this, we'll move on. There's one Sahabi who narrates that one day the Prophet ﷺ came to us. He turned to us and he said, Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin. He addressed the Prophet ﷺ addressed the companions and he's saying, Ya ma'ashar al-muhajirin. All the assemble of the muhajirun, all the assemble of the muhajirs. Khamsa khisalin idha nazalna bikum wa a'udhu billahi an tudrikuhunna. That there are 5 such traits that will one day descend upon you. And I pray to Almighty Allah and I seek Allah's protection that you attain one of this. So the Prophet ﷺ said there are 5 such things that when they become prevalent, they will then be followed with a punishment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so then the Prophet ﷺ said, إِلَّمْ تظهر الفاحشة في قوم قط حتى يغلب عليها إلا ظهر فيها طاعون الأوجاع. The Prophet ﷺ said the first thing, number 1, whenever promiscuity, zina, fornication becomes endemic, it becomes widespread amongst the community, amongst a nation, then Almighty Allah causes ta'un and plague and hunger to become endemic. Allah Ta'ala causes these things to emerge. And then he said, وَلَمْ يَنْقُصُوا الْمِكْيَالَ وَالْمِيزَانَ إِلَّا أُخِذُوا بِالسِّنِينَ وَشِدَّةِ الْمُؤُنَةِ وَجُورِ السُّلْطَانِ. Number 2, that no people deceive people, no nation, they deceive other people in their financial transactions. The wordings are, the Prophet ﷺ said that they do not decrease in the scale. So decrease in the scale. In other words, conning people. So no people, no nation, they con people during business transactions, except Almighty Allah seizes them through famine. Through famine, through constraint provisions, Allah Ta'ala restricts their provisions, and the tyranny of sultan, the tyranny of leaders. That's the second thing. The third thing, وَلَمْ يَمْنَعُ الزَّكَاةِ مِنْ أَمْوَالِهِمْ إِلَّا مُنِعُوا الْقَطْرَ مِنَ السَّمَاءِ. That no people prevent or abstain from giving zakat. In other words, they can give zakat, but they do not give zakat, except Almighty Allah withholds the rain. Allah Ta'ala does not descend rain upon them. And number 4, وَمَا نَقَضُوا أَهْدَ اللَّهِ وَأَهْدَ رَسُولِهِ إِلَّا سَلَّطَ عَلَيْهِمُ الْعَدُوُّ مِنْ غَيْرِهِمْ. Number 4, that no people, they break the covenant that they made with Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, that no such people who break their agreement, who sever their agreement and a connection from Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. In other words, they throw the Quran aside, they throw the Sunnah of the Prophet aside. They have no interest in practicing Islam or following the guidance of Allah and the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They have no interest in that, except the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that in response, Allah Ta'ala will sallata alayhim aduwan. Allah will cause the enemies to triumph over them. So Allah will cause the enemies to dominate them. And the fifth one, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ أَئِمَّةٌ بِكِتَابِ اللَّهِ وَيَجْبِرُ فِيهَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ إِلَّا جَعَلَ بَأْسَهُمْ بَيْنَهُم. And the fifth one, and this is probably the most scariest one, the Prophet ﷺ said that the leaders, the Muslim leaders, if they do not judge according to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed. If the leaders do not judge according to what Almighty Allah has revealed, then Allah will create division and discord and conflict between themselves. Subhanallah. Each and every of these punishments that Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, they are followed by a misdeed or a big or a bad deed that people become responsible of. So number one, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said about zina. Prophet ﷺ said about zina. Number two, the Prophet ﷺ said about deceiving other people in transactions. Number three, that people withhold the money from giving zakat or charity. Number four, that people break their covenant from Allah and His Messenger ﷺ. And number five, that the leaders, the Muslim leaders, the imams, they refuse to judge according to the book of Almighty Allah. And the Prophet ﷺ said, when these five things become common, then for each one will be followed with a punishment. That is the ta'un, that is hunger, that is famine and drought, and that is the sovereignty of the sovereignty of tyrant sultan over the people. Allah Ta'ala withholds the rain, and Allah Ta'ala causes the enemies to overrun the Muslim nation. And number five, that except that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates discord and division between the Muslims. In other, they'll be fighting with one another. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us all. So in any case, so the Prophet ﷺ said, so coming to the hadith, that it is a punishment that Almighty Allah descends on His people, whoever He wishes. But now begs the question, that if this is a pandemic that affects every person, surely there are believers, there are true believers amongst them, and they'll be affected by that. So what's the justification? So then the Prophet ﷺ said, وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ جَعَلَهُ رَحْمَةً لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Almighty Allah will make this, however, this pandemic, a mercy for the believers. So, and then the Prophet ﷺ continued that لَيْسَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ يَقَعُ طَاعُونَ فَيَمْكُثُ فِي بَلَدِهِ صَابِرًا مُحْتَسِبًا يَعْلَمُ أَنَّهُ لَنْ يُصِيبَهُ إِلَّا مَا كَتَبَ اللَّهُ لَهُ إِلَّا كَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ شَهِيدٍ. There is no person, if you look at the underlined statement, that's the translation. There is no one who befalls a plague remaining in the city or home. In another narration, the Prophet said in a home. So in other words, quarantining a person staying in their own homes. So this is the narration of Musnad Ahmad, where the Prophet said, "Fi baytihi," in his home, and observes patience and hopes with for reward, knowing that nothing shall afflict him except what Allah has decreed or written for him. So there is no person who, number one, observes patience, he stays in his city, observes patience, and hopes in rewarding Almighty Allah, and knowing the fact that nothing will afflict him except what Almighty Allah has decreed for him. إِلَّا كَانَ لَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ شَهِيدٍ. Except for him is going to be the reward of a martyr. Except that Almighty Allah will reward him with the reward of a martyr. Subhanallah. So here Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is given us glad tidings. So this is also applicable even within the current pandemic that we're living in. Now, if a person, if he was to remain patient, because we can't travel anywhere, because we're not traveling anywhere because of the lockdown. And by the way, this lockdown and restricting people's movement was part of the sunnah, the prophetic instructions, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in one hadith that if you hear of a pandemic, if you hear of a plague breaking out in the city, and you're not in there, do not enter that city. But if you are in the midst of the outbreak of this pandemic and you're in this affected city, then the Prophet said, do not emerge from that city. So this is what you call like restriction of movement. So the Prophet ﷺ said he will attain the reward of a shaheed, of a martyr. Now, so some of the historical records of the plague of Ta'un. Now, the first thing is the children of Israel, the Bani Israel. Now, the Bani Israel, there's a verse of the Holy Quran where Almighty Allah Ta'ala states in the Quran, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِينَ خَرَجُوا مِنْ دِيَارِهِمْ وَهُمْ أُلُوفٌ حَضَرَ الْمَوْتِ فَقَالَ لَهُمُ اللَّهُ مُوتُوا ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُمْ. Allah Ta'ala states that, have you not seen, O Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, have you not heard about the Bani Israel, that when they emerged from their homes and then Allah said to them, die, and they died. Then Allah Ta'ala resurrected them, revived them, and gave them life again. So basically, in short, it comes in the books of tafsir that where there was a city there was a city in a village during the time of the Bani Israel that where a plague broke out. So many of the villagers, they started, what they did was they fled from the city. They weren't supposed to, according to prophetic instructions, even the instructions that were given by the prophets at the time, they were not supposed to leave the city, but rather remain in the city, observe patience. But instead, they all fled. They fled in thousands, with the exception of few. The few true believers who remained in the city, they all thousands of amongst them, they fled to another city, and many of them started to claim that it was our fleeing that saved us, knowing the fact that nothing happens except through Almighty Allah's will. But yet these Bani Israel, they began to attribute this success to their fleeing, not to Almighty Allah. So to Allah Ta'ala to teach them a lesson, Almighty Allah cast death upon them all. So they all died. Allah Ta'ala said to them, Mutu, all of you die. So they all died. So they remained in that state. So they died and they were buried for for many years. Many years later, there was a prophet, and I think his name was Sayyidina Hiskil, or some say it was Sayyidina Shmuel alayhi salam. One of the names, there's ikhtilaf in that. So with this prophet happened to pass by the graves of these deceased Bani Israel, and then through revelation, through wahi, Allah Ta'ala informed this prophet of what happened. This prophet then made dua to Almighty Allah to resurrect and revive them, give them life once more. Almighty Allah accepted the prophet's dua, and they all resurrected. They all resurrected from their graves, and they continued living their normal lives. That's what Allah Ta'ala said, ثُمَّ أَحْيَاهُمْ, then Allah Ta'ala gave them life. So this was an example of the children of Israel. Number two is the infamous plague of Amwas, a very famous, a prominent, a famous plague that broke out during the time of Sayyidina Umar Farooq radiallahu anhu. And it's a long story. I've included this in the article on the website. So basically, in short, it was the story that where Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu, when he set off from Medina to Syria to meet with his elite commanders, he wanted to enter a city, but he was informed that a huge plague had broken out, which has affected so many people. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, that he was consulting with his companions, Sahabas, what should he do? Should he enter the city or not? Enter the city or not? So there was back and forth conversation. Sayyidina Abdurrahman ibn Auf radiallahu anhu, who had happened to return from a journey, met with Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, and during this discussion, he said that I heard a hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam regarding this. And then he said that I heard the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam say that if it occurs in a land which you are in, then do not leave it whilst fleeing from it. But if you hear about it in a land which you are not in, then do not enter it. So it's the same thing what I just mentioned, that if you're in the city, if you're in the affected city, then do not leave the city. But if you hear about in a city and which you are not in, then do not enter the city. So Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he praised Almighty Allah, and he returned back to Madinah Munawwara, because this was then an indication that he should not enter the city. He went back, and somebody said to him once, it's interesting that somebody said to him that, well, are you fleeing from are you trying to escape? Are you trying to evade from the qadr of Allah? So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has written for you that this will happen to you, but yet you're trying to flee from it, are you running away from the qadr of Allah? Sayyidina Umar radiallahu responded, he said, no, we are fleeing from the qadr of Allah to the qadr of Allah. In other words, that we are fleeing from this pandemic to the qadr of Allah, that which Allah ta'ala has destined for me, i.e. that this pandemic will not affect me. And it's mentioned that many of the Muslim historians, for example, the great famous Muslim historian Ibn Kathir rahimahullah mentions that there were no less than 20,000 Sahabas who had died as a result of this plague. 20,000 Sahabas. That's the minimum report that's mentioned. 20,000 Sahabas. And there were many great Sahabas who died as a result of this. For example, Abu Ubaidah ibn Jarrah radiallahu anhu, who's one of the Ashra Mubasharas, one of the elite commanders, he passed away. Sayyidina Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, he passed away as a result of this pandemic. And not only him, there were his whole family, his wife and children also died. There's another Sahabi, Sharahbil ibn al-Hasanah radiallahu anhu. These were the great companions who had died and passed away as a result of the infamous plague of Amwas. Likewise, Another plague that broke out during the time of Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. This was when there was a conversation between Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu and Mu'adh ibn Jabal radiallahu anhu, and there was a famous conversation that took place between them, that where Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, who was the governor over Alexandria, which is modern day Egypt, after the conquest of Alexandria, Umar radiallahu anhu appointed Amr ibn al-As as a leader or as a governor over the region of Alexandria, which is modern day Egypt. So when a plague broke out, when a plague broke out during his time, then there was a conversation that took place with Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu. And by the way, Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu, when he died, sorry, just to correct here, by the way, he passed away during a plague, not from the time of Amwas, but it was another plague that broke out. Okay, it was another plague that broke out. But nevertheless, Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu did pass away during a plague, whether it was an Amwas plague or whether there was another plague that happened after. Anyways, so Sayyidina Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu, he instructed all of his people to retreat to the mountains and valleys. What we call today is social distancing. He says, all of you disperse to the mountains and valleys and maintain what we call today social distancing, and do not socialize amongst each other. So Mu'adh bin Jabal radiallahu anhu, he objected against Amr ibn al-As radiallahu anhu. He objected against him. And he said to him that why you doing this is because, and then he narrated the hadith that if a person was, the hadith which I just related to you from, say, the Aisha radiallahu anha, that if a person observed patience, then Almighty Allah would give him shahada. So there was this conversation that took place, but nevertheless, a plague that took out between them. Likewise, during the land of Basra, Imam Ibn Kathir rahimahullah mentions that it was the time where there were over 70,000 people had died as a result of the plague that broke out in the 69 Hijri. And he says that, and it was actually during this time, it's mentioned, Ibn Kathir rahimahullah states, is that there was one man that at the time that when this plague broke out, it's a very interesting story here, that when this plague broke out, then they instructed everyone to close the doors of their home. There were many people that had died as a result of this infamous plague during the 69 Hijri. Ibn Kathir rahimahullah mentions, which just in one day, 70,000 people had died. There were so many people that had passed away, had died as a result of this, that they didn't have enough manpower to bury them. So they would close the door. They remain. They will keep the doors of their homes closed, and people were buried in their own homes, or people were left to stay in their own homes. After many days, that when the plague was uplifted, and then the survivors went into everybody's home, it stated that they found one boy, who survived on the milk of a dog. Survived on the milk of a dog. So it was this dog that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent, who would nourish this infant child so that it could survive. And this child, it lost all his family members, but he was the only one that survived. And then the person who narrates the story, he says that I saw that child grow up holding his own beard, and he was in the masjid doing ibadat of Almighty Allah. Now, obviously, this was the time where he was only an infant child at the time, and he was drinking the milk of a dog. But that was the way of that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself caused this child to survive. So that was the famous incident that took place there. Then likewise, another one, the people of Sham in the year 79 Hijri. Likewise, the famine and endemic that broke out in year 489 Hijri. And it was during the time of the 49 Hijri. It was in the year 49 Hijri that broke out. This broke out during the land of Spain, and it's mentioned that it was this time that where many of the masajids were closed. So it's mentioned in one of the books of history. It says that in the place of Andalus, there was a famine that broke out. وَفِيهَا كَانَ الْقَحْطُ الْعَظِيمِ بِالْأُنْدُلُسِ وَالْوَبَاءِ. Now, in the land of Andalus, in the land of Spain, it states that a pandemic that broke out, a huge famine that broke out, and a pandemic. وَمَاتَ خَلْقٌ خلق كثير, and many people had died as a result of this. بحيث أن المساجد بقيت مغلقة, that many of the masajids remain closed. So here now what we have about many of the massages being closed or not, and that's a separate debate, that's a separate discussion in itself. But it's mentioned that many of the massages remain closed. ما لها من يصلي بها. There was nobody there to pray salah therein. ويسمى عام الجوع القبيل. This was known as the Great Famine. The Great Famine. The Great Famine, Great Famine, and the Great Hunger, that because of which, as a result, many people had died. That many of the massages were closed, many of the massages were empty, and there was nobody there to pray salah therein. So this occurred during the year 489 Hijri. So now it brings the question as to why Almighty Allah causes such pandemics to arise. Why does Allah Ta'ala test people in the first place? So the reasons for life testing. So we're going to start from top 12 o'clock clockwise. So we're going to start from the top at 12 o'clock. A reminder to our misconduct. So Almighty Allah, the reason why that He allows tests the nation in such a way, number one is to remind us of our misconduct. And as was already mentioned, I already discussed in the beginning, in the hadith Sayyidah Aisha radiallahu anha, that it is primarily a punishment for the people. And why is it a punishment? Because of their misdeeds, because of their sins. And the detailed hadith which I had already mentioned about the 5 things, that when they become common, then Allah Ta'ala will substitute, then Allah Ta'ala will then cause 5 such punishments to follow each of these sins. So this is a clear indication that it is due to our sins and misconduct. Number 2 is to strengthen our faith in Him, is so that we can use these times and moments to strengthen our faith and to believe in Almighty Allah, that nothing happens except through His will. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's demonstrating His power and His qudra, and knowing the fact that nothing gets past Almighty Allah. Almighty Allah is very vigilant and is fully aware of what mankind do. So, and if they do not take heed from these testing times, then this is nothing but just this will cause nothing but more problems to them in the hereafter. So this will lead to their destruction in the hereafter. So the whole purpose is so that we can gain close to Almighty Allah, strengthen our faith in Him. Number 3 is personal introspection. In other words, self-reflection, so that we can start reflecting upon ourselves and can think about the sins that we are committing, and how we can desist from those sins. Then number 4 is reminders of our vulnerability. It is to remind us that how vulnerable we are. We are all vulnerable, and know that Almighty Allah is in charge. Almighty Allah, He has the power to do everything and anything. And we look at this current pandemic that we're living in now, that it's just hit us so hard, so unexpectedly. What does it show? That no matter how much, and it's affected everyone globally. Everyone globally is affected by this, not just people in the UK, but all of the countries in Europe, and all of the countries in the United States of America. Everywhere, this whole pandemic, people are now panicking. People are panicking, and it's affected every person. Is to show how weak mankind is, how weak we are, and how powerful Almighty Allah is. So to remind us of our vulnerability, in spite of all of the means that we have at our disposal. And finally, attain closeness to Him through good deeds, so that we can ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness. We can seek, we can increase in our worship to Him, recitation of the Quran. We start remembering Him more constantly, and attain closeness to Him through good deeds. Because if a person was to die in this state, he dies at the degree of a shaheed. So these are just some of the things just to mention, although there are many more things that we can say, but to suffice to say that these tests, we should not consider it as a punishment for every single person. I'm talking about for the believers here. And a person should never ever assume and think that just because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends this as a punishment for certain individuals, doesn't mean that it's going to be a punishment for every single person. For the believers, it is a mercy, it is a rahmat for them. And furthermore, is so that we can take a positive lesson from this. Like what Mufti Sahib just mentioned earlier on, he says that we should look at things positively. he alluded to this, that we should always look at things positively. So in spite of this endemic crisis that we're living in, think of the positive things that we can get from this. For example, gives us more time to spend time with our family, quality time with our family. It's a time to self-reflect. It's a time to read Quran more regularly. It's a time to remember Almighty Allah, increase in our remembrance in Allah, and more, and furthermore, to utilize this time and opportunity to uh, to gain more Islamic knowledge. So there's ways that we can. There are many ways that we can use this productively and take a positive lesson from this. It's always about the mind. It's always about how you deal, how you treat this, treat a situation. If you're going to take the negatives from it, then it's never going to be beneficial for you. You will never be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But if you take a positive lesson from this, then there's a lot for you to learn, for us rather. Now, what to learn from the coronavirus pandemic? So first things first is to seek forgiveness. So as mentioned, that we can utilize this opportunity to get close to Almighty Allah. Number one is to seek forgiveness. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness abundantly. There's one story that comes to mind, that Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal rahmatullah alayhi, if I could remember correctly, was that I think it was like a dream that he saw or something, that where that he was informed that there is one individual living in his time that was amongst the mustajab da'wat. He was amongst those that whose du'as were accepted on all occasions, all the time. So whenever he made a du'a, he was Allah will answer his du'a straight away. So Imam Ahmad al-Hanbal rahmatullah alayhi asked him that what caused you to reach to this status that where all of your du'as are accepted? You know what his response was? He says, I do istighfar all the time. I do istighfar all the time. I make istighfar all the time. There's a beautiful hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, Man lazim al istighfar, ja'alallahu, and the Prophet ﷺ said that whosoever holds firm to istighfar, ja'alallahu lahu min kulli hammin faraja, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will جعل الله له من كل ضيق مخرجا ومن كل هم فرجا ورزقه من حيث لا يحتسب. The Prophet ﷺ said, Allah will award a person three things if a person constantly holds on to istighfar. Number one, Allah will create a way out for him from every constrained thing. Every restricted occasion or every restricted condition, Allah will create a way out for the person. Number two, وَجَعَلَ اللَّهُ مِن كُلِّ هَمٍّ فَرَجًا, and Allah will create expansion from all grievous times. So any time that when a person is going through grievous moments on sorrow and distress, Allah will create expansion. Allah will create ease for him thereafter. وَرَزَقَهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. And number three, Almighty Allah will provide sustenance from him where he could not imagine. Allah will provide for him through unimaginable means. So three benefits of istighfar. Number one, Allah will create an exit point for him from all difficult and constrained situations. And number two, Allah will remove the anxiety and distress from him. And number three, Allah will provide him through unimaginable ways. So this is the benefit of istighfar. Number two, to give in charity. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that inna sadaqata la tudfi'u ghadab ar-rabb wa tadfa'u maytat as-su. That giving charity, it extinguishes the anger of Allah and it averts a bad death. And there are many بادروا بالصدقة فإن البلاء لا يتخطاها. The Prophet ﷺ said, hasten into charity, because no calamity can never overcome it. No calamity can overcome a charity. Abstain from immoral behaviors. The Prophet ﷺ said, immorality never appears amongst people to such an extent that they commit it openly, but except plagues and diseases that were never known amongst the predecessors will spread amongst them. This is the hadith of Sunan Ibn Majah and declared Sahih in Mustadrak Imam Hakim. So goes back to the same point, that where all of these pandemics, they occur due to our immoral behavior, immoral actions. May Allah Ta'ala save us from all this. And furthermore, taking precaution and follow the advice of the medical experts, keeping the distance apart, avoid attending overcrowded places. So the general codes of guidelines that are set by the scientists and doctors and the government and the guidelines which the government has outlined for us, to follow those. Why is that? is because tie the camel and trust in Allah. Because tie the camel, it's a metaphorical phrase to indicate that we adopt the means, we adopt the asbabs, and we place our trust in Almighty Allah. We cannot go to the extreme of just trusting Almighty Allah without following the correct guidelines. Even the Prophet ﷺ himself, on certain occasions, he maintained distance from people. So, for example, there's one hadith that where once is one of the year of delegation. In the year delegation, the 10th year Hijri of the year of delegation, where many people came in huge crowds and delegations to visit the Prophet ﷺ, there was one man the Prophet ﷺ heard of that was suffering from leprosy. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to him from a distance that you stay there, I've accepted your bay'ah, you go back home. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam maintained distance. However, there's another hadith in which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he ate in the same plate with the person who suffered from leprosy, so from a leper. So this is a separate discussion in itself. I've written a detailed article on this, a title, Are Disease Contagious?, available on the JK Fatah website. I've just presented a summary of Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani rahmatullah alayh's discussion on his commentary on the conflicting hadith of whether diseases are contagious or not. But suffice to say that from the sunnah, from the prophetic practice, from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know that social distancing is important. In fact, there's another hadith that where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam himself said that you should stand a distance of 1 spear length from a leper. You should stand at 1 spear length from a leper. And another hadith, the Prophet said, do not gaze at a leper. Do not. So anybody who's, for example, who's abnormal, physically abnormal, so you should not gaze at them, because that might offend them. And the Prophet ﷺ said, any person suffering from a disease that is contagious, then stand 1 spear length. That's approximately 1 meter, or just 1 meter or so. So from the prophetic sunnah, we know that we should practice social distancing. So that represents tie the camel. In other words, adopt the asbabs and then put your trust in Almighty Allah. I'qal wa tawakkal. These are the words. So for those affected, then take lessons from the story of Prophet Ayyub alayhi salatu wasalam. Recall the suffering and the dua that he recited. So the famous dua that he recited after 8 years of severe illness that struck him, he said, Rabbi anni masani yadur wa anta arhamur rahimin. Oh my Lord, that harm has afflicted me and you are the most merciful. For 8 years, Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salatu salam, he was isolated. He was isolated from his own people. He had lost his family. He lost his wealth, his family, they all passed away. And the only person that survived from his family was his own wife. And his own people, they had isolated him and threw him out of the city near a garbage place, that where Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salatu salam would stay for many years, so that people do not be affected by the disease that he is suffering. And the only person that was there to attend to his service was his own wife, radiyallahu anha. And after 8 years, then Almighty Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam made dua to Almighty Allah, then Allah relieved him and cured him from his illness. Yeah, it's a separate discussion that why Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam waited, why didn't he make dua straight away? That's a separate discussion in itself. But what we can understand, but what's important for us is to take the lesson from Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam's story and recite the dua for protection. The following slides will have the duas for protection. I will show you there. And know that nothing happens except to Allah's will. And as Muslims, our faith lies in Allah and the one who has the ability to inflict and cure illnesses. So this is a key point to remember, is that everything happens through the will of Almighty Allah. Just as He is the one who has the power to inflict harm and illness on a person, He is the one who has the ability to remove that illness and to cure the person. Likewise, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, when he was giving dawah to his people and he was explaining to them who Allah is, one of the things that he said about Allah, and is recorded in the Quran, وَإِذَا مَرِضْتُ فَهُوَ يَشْفِينِ. When I am ill, He is the one who cures me. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who cures people from all illnesses. He's the one that cures people from all illnesses. So we should always remind ourselves that it is Almighty Allah who cures people from illness. And just to add to this point here, that a lot of the times when people start questioning Almighty Allah about why He does things, it's all about the mindset. It's about your perception in Almighty Allah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in Hadith Qudsi, Ana inda dhanni abdi bi wa ana ma'ahu idha dhakarani. I'm with my servant the way he harbors an impression on me, and I'm with him when he remembers me. What this hadith is suggesting is that Almighty Allah, He deals with people in accordance to how they perceive Allah. So if they have a good impression in Allah, Allah Ta'ala will treat him with mercy. Well, if the individual has a negative impression on Almighty Allah, then Allah Ta'ala deals with him negatively. So Almighty Allah, He is the most merciful, but at the same time He has His policies and principles. He deals with people however people deal with Him. So in short, that questioning and objecting against Allah is never the answer, my dear brothers and sisters. Begging Allah, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for forgiveness and asking for His mercy is the answer to the problem. Is the answer to the problem. Look at Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salatu salam, that for 8 years that when he suffered from this severe acute illness, never once did he ever complain to Allah. In fact, it comes in the narrations that Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salatu salam would constantly praise Almighty Allah. Constantly praise Almighty Allah. And there are many things to be mentioned about Sayyidina Ayyub alayhi salam's story, but however time doesn't allow us. But just to suffice to say here, my dear brothers and sisters, that the answer is asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for His mercy and forgiveness, not questioning Almighty Allah. So some useful du'as, these are some useful du'as that we could recited. There are many du'as, but I've just presented 3 here just for simplicity. There's this du'a to be recited morning and evening, morning and evening, 3 times after Fajr, 3 times after Maghrib Salah. Bismillahil ladhi la yadurru ma'a ismihi shay'un fil ardi wa la fis sama wa huwa as-sami'ul alim. That in the name of Allah, that nothing comes with His name, anything in the heavens, not in the earth, and He is the all-hearing and the all-knowledgeable. This is the same dua that Sayyidina Khalid bin Waheed radiallahu anhu recited before he drank poison. So before he drank poison, he recited this dua, nothing happened. And there's a whole detailed account and story about that. Next, another hadith, another dua, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-barasi wal-junul wal-judham wa min sayyi al-asqam. And another dua, Allahumma inni as'aluka al-'afwa wal-'afiyya fi dunya wal-akhirah. So the last 2 du'as, you can recite them at any time, any occasions. It's always preferable to recite these du'as after Fard Salah, because after the Fard prayer, the du'a that one makes is accepted. But the first du'a, however, should be recited 3 times. 3 times in the morning after Fajr Salah and 3 times in the evening after Maghrib Salah. Now, coping with the distress of the pandemic and loss of beloved ones. So how do we deal with that? Again, this is a detailed topic, a detailed discussion in itself, but just to suffice to say here, that know that life is a test from Almighty Allah, and that one day we all shall return to Him. Whenever there are many people, many of our friends, and there are many great ulamas and great scholars from Bangladesh and many other ulamas, rahimahumullah, and many of our beloved students. One of our female students, her mother, who passed away just a few days ago, and one of my dear friends, that his brother's father-in-law who had passed away as a result of the COVID-19. Just in these last few weeks, many people are just dying and dying, and it's the first time ever they had to dig multiple graves. They had to dig. Okay, they had to dig multiple graves because due to the mass number of dead people. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us sabr. And knowing the fact that, you see, Allah, we all going to return to Allah one day. I mean, what's the dua that we read when a person dies? What's the dua? The famous dua is Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, which translates as, verily we belong to Allah and we will return to Almighty Allah. Inna lillahi, that lam is for tamleek. In other words, Allah Ta'ala owns us. We don't own anything in this world. We don't even own our own body, our children, our spouses. Nobody owns. They all belong to Almighty Allah. They build this whole world is Allah's property. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has entrusted this property with us. Allah Ta'ala says, هُوَ الَّذِي خَلَقَ لَكُم مَّا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا. It is Almighty Allah who's created everything for us. Allah's created everything for us. Allah's created the sun, the moon, the animals, the cattle, everything for us, for our well-being. Yes? Allah's created everything for us, for our well-being. And one day, everything's going to return to Him. If Allah Ta'ala has given us our children as an amanat, He will one day take them away from us. Allah Ta'ala has given us our parents. as an amana, as a trust, and one day he will take that reclaim his trust. He will reclaim his trust back. So everything in this world belongs to him, and he can reclaim it however and whenever he wishes. Know that nothing afflicts except through Allah's permission. Not to overwhelm yourself with COVID-19 updates. I mean, there's a whole.
Granddad ear things. Second now. Granddad wore earphones.
Can I just request somebody to mute their? Can I just request somebody to? Assalamu alaikum. Can I just request somebody to mute their voice, please? Can I just will be a moment. Yeah, that's better. So in any case, as I was saying, is that Almighty Allah has, so not to overwhelm yourself with the updates. And there's this notion that people have that they always have to keep up to date with the current events or the current situation. Sometimes it could be overwhelming, and especially because when you listen to the news, when you read the articles, there's nothing but just negativity. And sometimes too much of negativity can make a person negative, can cause a person to despair. Because remember, everything happens through the will of Allah, and as long as a person has the trust in Allah, because as mentioned, that Allah Ta'ala tested the nation before us. In fact, in worse situation, in fact, probably in worse possible conditions. But yet, how did the people respond at that time? That itself is a discussion in itself. But what we can say that in light of the Quran and the Sunnah, we have excellent examples. We have excellent examples and guides to follow. So don't inundate yourself with too much information about COVID-19, because there's nothing but just negativity. When a person, and by reading too much negative posts or listening to too much negative news, it makes a person think negativity. A person becomes pessimistic now. And then they start doubting Almighty Allah. Then they start questioning Almighty Allah. Then people fall into distress and they fall into depression. So my dear brothers and sisters, don't overwhelm yourself too much with COVID-19 update. It's not a big deal that if you are not up to date with the latest information or the latest news. It is not a big deal. The most important thing is maintaining control of yourself and managing yourself. Recall the story of Prophet Ayyub alayhi salam. Use this moment to attain closeness to Almighty Allah. So as was already mentioned. Now, what does the Quran say? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already mentions in the Quran, وَلَنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. Allah ta'ala says, and we shall surely try you with some form of fear, hunger, shortage of wealth, lives, fruits, and fruits. Fruits is just another way of saying of resources. And give glad tidings to the patient. You notice we have been tested in the midst of this pandemic in every single one of them. Fear of what's going to happen, panic, hunger. There are many people, unfortunately, homeless people, for example, they are suffering through starvation, shortage of wealth. What's happened? It's just had a knock-on effect on the country's economy. The economic system, the economy of country is slowly now just shattering, just collapsing. Many people are dying, for example. But then what does Allah Ta'ala say? وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ. And give glad tidings to the to those who observe patience, who recite Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, knowing the fact that. So this is just another way of placing the trust in Almighty Allah. Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu relates that Sayyidina Abu Hurairah radiallahu relates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, now this is the reward of a person who's suffering from distress. So Abu Hurairah there relates that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that no fatigue, no distress, no sorrow, no grief, no harm, no distress afflicts a Muslim, even a thorn that pricks him, except that Allah Ta'ala expires his sin by him. So any kind of difficulty or distress that a person is experiencing, Almighty Allah will use that as a means of expiating and cleansing a person from their sins, provided that they observe patience. And then the Prophet ﷺ also mentioned in the hadith how amazing is the affair of a believer, that indeed all of his affairs are full of goodness. And this is only exclusive for the believer. The Prophet ﷺ said that if happiness attains him, then he is grateful. and that is good for him. If hardship befalls him, then he endures patience, then that is even good for him. So in other words, he balances out between shukr and patience. Shukr and patience. All the good things that Almighty Allah has bestowed him with and gifted him with, he expresses gratitude and shukr to Almighty Allah. But when a person is inflicted with calamity, then he observes patience. And the Prophet ﷺ said that he's got the best of both worlds. In the time of happiness, he does shukr, and the time of difficulty, he observes patience. In both cases, he will receive reward. Which is why that, this quality of shukr is a really important quality. I remember somebody sent me a message, actually, a WhatsApp message from a scholar who's passed away now, rahimahullah, somebody asked him that why is it that many people, many Muslims leave their religion, leave faith. One of the reasons, he said that the reason why people leave faith is because they don't do shukr. That you even have certain ulamas and scholars, for example, are practicing people, in the end, they just they astray from the right path. One of the reasons is because that we don't do enough shukr. So that's why, my dear brothers and sisters, that whatever good things that Allah Ta'ala has given us, learn to do shukr all the time. And what does the Quran say? La in shakartum la azidannakum. If you be grateful, Allah Ta'ala says, if you be grateful, la azidannakum, I will surely increase. There's a double emphasis, the lam of the emphasis and the noon emphasis at the end. For those who are students of Arabic grammar will know that in both instances, in both places, Allah Ta'ala has included prefixed and suffixed emphasis, words, particles of emphasis, which means I will surely increase. So the more shukr a person does, the more Allah Ta'ala increases in his favors and bounties. So let's move on now to the Ramadan related queries. So we have about a couple of minutes, and then we will take questions and answers, inshallah. I do apologize if we do go over time, then I do apologize because we had a few mishaps here and there. But anyways, so now Ramadan related queries. So illnesses due to COVID-19. Now, just to suffice to say that illnesses that permits one breaking or not to fast at all. So these are the four overarching principles that we have to keep in mind when it comes to illnesses. Those illnesses that legitimizes, permits, allows a person to break the fast or not to fast at all. So number one, top left hand corner, we'll start from acute physical pain, headache, pain or loss of limb, etc. So you're going through some physical pain or extreme headache, for example, or you're going through extreme fever, or for example, you got a toothache or anything that which is very acute, that is unbearable. So unbearable pain, whether it causes a loss of limb, whether a pain worsens the condition of a limb, worsen the condition of a toothache, for example, in all these instances, one can either break the fast or not to fast at all. Number two, the fear of the condition worsening. So you know that if you were to continue fasting, then your condition will worsen. It will exacerbate the condition. Then a person has the option not to fast or to break the fast. Next, delay in recovery. That is not necessarily going to worsen the condition, and neither is a person going through acute physical pain. But however, to continuously fast, it will delay in the recovery, because the whole purpose of medication is so that we can by taking medication, for example, is to regain health, to regain one's health. Now, anything that delays in recovery is a legitimate excuse for not to fast or to break the fast. And likewise, physical weakness, for example, a pregnant woman, breastfeeding woman, or a frail person, a person who's in a condition that where they are unable to fast due to old age, or for example, diabetic people, or those who are extreme asthmatic people that they have to always use an asthma pump, for example. There's no hope for them to fast at any time, neither the summertime, neither during the winter times for qada. There's no hope for them to fast. So this physical weakness is a prolonged weakness, losing all hope of recovery. They just pay fidya for every single fast. So physical weakness is another legitimate reason for not fasting or breaking the fast. With regards to breastfeeding a child, is because of is for the safety of the child, rather. So it's not necessarily for to cause weakness to a woman, but rather because of her child, which is permissible for her to fast. Now, if a fasting person struggles to continue the fast during the COVID-19 symptoms, so based on the principles that we've already mentioned, it is permissible to break the fast and make up for it later. So, to be honest, this is more like a generic. Generic rule, but each individual case will be dealt on his own merit. So it's advisable that if a person is unsure, they contact the local mufti, the local alim or scholar to explain their situation. Then the scholar will be able to advise accordingly. Furthermore, individuals with confirmed suspected COVID-19 with moderate symptoms of underlying health condition can postpone the fast to a later date. A strong likelihood of falling extremely ill also permits postponing fast. So this is according to the principles. So again, doctors, nurses, and allied health workers who are treating are recommended to carefully consider alternative options. There's a whole issue of, because those who are the frontline workers, the key workers, for example, you have doctors, nurses, and all healthcare professionals who are susceptible to catching the coronavirus. In those particular situations, if somebody has the fear of catching coronavirus, although they're not suffering the illness itself, then in my understanding is that they're not able. They should fast. That should not be a reason for them not to fast. But once they've caught the illness, and if it's unbearable, if the illness becomes unbearable, then they have the option to break the fast. So if the Sharia is already giving you the option to break the fast, then in this particular situation, until that you are not inflicted with the illness, then my understanding is that they should continue fast and try to consider all options until all other options are blocked and there's no way for them to fast. Therefore, then they can postpone the fast later on. Likewise, for those who wear the PPE gear, person protection. Sorry, I don't know what it stands for, but the PPE equipment, the PPE uniform. So there's a case that where many people, when they fast for long hours, they may likely have a chance for suffer of dehydration or severe thirst and so on. So again, all possible alternatives should be considered, and if all those options proved to be vain and not practical, then as a last resort they can postpone the fast to a later occasion, later date. But again, these are just generic principles where each case will be dealt with on its own merit individually. Now, Ramadan related queries performing salah. Now this is a key question. We will open the floor to question and answers, so just bear with me a few minutes. Ramadan related queries performing salahs. Now there's a whole issue related to performing Jum'ah Salah. I'll just begin with that first. I've written a detailed answer on this, and it's available on our JK Fatah website. You can read it there for yourself. But our personal position is, and again, we're not imposing this on anybody, that the Jum'ah Salah itself should not be performed at home, but rather Dhuhr Salah should be performed at home. Yes? And the reason being we say that is because within the Hanafi tradition, that the time in which the Jummah Salah is performed, that's the actual Dhuhr time. So the Dhuhr Salah itself was the primary Salah prescribed. But yet when Jummah Salah was prescribed, then that substituted the Dhuhr prayer only for the day of Jummah. So when a person is unable to perform the Jummah Salah, then you have to go back to the Dhuhr Salah, which is the primary Salah that was initially prescribed. That's the first thing. Secondly, there are certain conditions that need to be met for Jummah Salah and Eid Salah to be met. Now, by the way, the prerequisites for Jummah Salah to be valid are same as the prerequisites for the Eid Salah. So whatever I'm going to discuss regarding Jummah Salah now, it applies to Eid Salah as well. Jummah Salah is usually a Salah that's supposed to be performed in a communal place. And one of the conditions for Jummah Salah and Eid Salah to be valid is Idul Ad, meaning public permission, open permission. So you pray Salah in a location or in a place where there's public access to people, or in a place where though there's no public access, there may be restricted access, but the local people there, they're all given public access to attend the Jummah Salah. So for example, at your workplace, for example, if a person praying Jummah Salah at the workplace, so you have about 20-30 people, so there's a designated place in one's workplace where they could read Jummah Salah, where all of the Muslim attendees are given full permission and access to perform the Jummah Salah. That is valid. So Jummah Salah generally is supposed to be performed in a communal place or in a place where there's open access given to people. Now, the home environment is not a public place. It's not a communal place by definition. It's only private for family members only. Family members. So therefore, performing Jummah Salah at home, it may lead to a slippery slope practice of people of this slippery slope practice that's going to be normalized and commonly practiced by people even after the endemic. Because think about this, my dear brothers and sisters, think about this, that before this whole endemic, before this whole coronavirus thing that happened, right, no scholar would ever give a fatwa that it's permissible for you to pray Jummah Salah at home. Everybody had to pray Jummah Salah at home, or the people in the workplace had to perform Jummah Salah in the workplace, or any other public area. So any person performing Jummah Salah at home, while Jummah Salah is taking place in the masjid, will not be permissible, because by definition the home does not fulfill the conditions for Jummah Salah to be valid, i.e. public access, because you can't give public access to people. Understand? So now when you're permitting people to perform Jummah Salah at home, it may lead to a slippery slope practice that where even after the endemic, people may continue performing Jummah Salah, because the pandemic itself per se is not a condition for Jummah Salah to be valid at the home. This is just our personal position, okay? And the fact that because Jummah Salah, it has a replacement with his Zohar Salah should be performed, and you can perform Zohar Salah in congregation. So in short, for the reason why that we advocate that Jummah Salah should not be performed in the home is because the fact that it does not fulfill all of the criteria and the conditions of Jummah Salah, i.e. it's not a communal place, it's a private place, for example. And number two is that there's no the condition of public access, meaning giving people public access, to the local people public access to the home, that is not fulfilled, because nobody can do that. It's impractical. Somebody did ask the question that what if somebody makes their home the living room a masalla, and makes an announcement to the local people that if anybody wants to perform Jummah Salah in my home, my doors are open for you. So this is Ibn al-Am. If this condition is fulfilled, can Jummah Salah be performed at home? Then I responded that yes, in that case, yes, because the condition of public access is not fulfilled. However, it's not advisable, because the whole purpose of not performing Salah in the masjid is because of social distancing. And if people start congregating in homes, then that defeats the very purpose of social distancing. So therefore, that is not advisable. So therefore, to conclude, is that instead of Jummah Salah, Zuhr Salah should be performed. If, however, I am aware that there are many ulamas who have allowed and permitted for Jummah Salah to be performed at home. If somebody, however, does follow the opinion of another alim or a scholar, and they do perform Jummah Salah at home, then does that suffice for that day Zuhr Salah? Yes, it does. You don't need to perform the Zuhr Salah, and the Jummah Salah itself will count towards the Salah on that day. However, our personal position is that you should not perform Jummah Salah there. So I hope that's clear. Now the same thing with Eid Salah, I'll just mention it now anyway, is that again the same condition is giving people public access. So by closing the doors and only allowing your family members to perform Eid Salah with you, it does not fulfill the condition. So therefore, Eid Salah, in our humble opinion, it should not be performed at home. So what should be performed instead? There's a hadith of Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu. Sayyidina Abdul Mas'ud radiallahu relates that if a person's Eid Salah is missed, then they should perform 4 rakats. And this is mustahab, by the way. This is not something that's compulsory, it's preferable. Is that they should perform 4 rakats, and these 4 rakats will count towards the Salatul Duha, the charged Salah. And they just recite it as normal. There'll be no khutbah, nothing. It's just like a normal 4 rakat and nafil salah. You could read it 4 rakats in one salam, or you could read it in 2 twos. Reading it in 2 twos is better. So replace the Eid Salah with these 4 rakats. That will be sufficient. There's no khutbah, no takbir, or nothing. So in any case, so these were just some of the things to mention. Now related to Taraweeh Salah, you, like as Mufti mentioned, we should perform 20 rakats Taraweeh. If a person is unable to recite complete the entire recitation of the Holy Quran, then the least they can do is they can recite certain portions of the surah, certain portions of the Quran, namely the last 10 surahs or anything that they know of the Quran. Now, performing Taraweeh Salah is permissible in congregation as well as individually. Though in congregation is the emphasized sunnah, but if a person cannot perform in congregation, they can perform the Taraweeh Salah individually. The Quran must be recited in Salah from memory. You cannot use the Mus'haf of the Quran itself. In the Hanafi madhab, the standard opinion within the Hanafi madhab is that it's not permissible to and to recite the Quran during Salah with the Mus'haf in the hand, or even the electronic device. Nowadays, people say we've got electronic device, and if you were to read the Quran, according to the Hanafi madhab, that's not permissible. Yes, there are other madhabs like the Maliki madhab, the Hanbali madhab, the Shafi madhab. They allow it for other reasons, but however, in the Hanafi madhab, it is not permissible. So therefore, why is because we have alternatives. Because completing this, so to complete the entire recitation of the Quran in Taraweeh Salah is not a fard. It's a sunnah practice that was introduced by Sayyidina Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. However, it is not a compulsory act. So even if a person does not recite the entire Quran, but rather just a few surahs of the Quran, then they have fulfilled the sunnah of Taraweeh Salah itself. Yes, so 20 rak'ahs should be performed whether in congregation individually. So there's another thing of the virtual prayers. To join a congregation salah of Makkah, Medina, or local masjid via the internet, TV, receiver, of any salah, including Taraweeh, is invalid. So this is called virtual prayer. So for example, if you're stood in your home and there's a TV projector, there's a TV in front of you, or there's a that projects the imam of your local masjid, or projects the imam of the Haramain live, and you follow the you fasten your intention of praying salah behind the imam, and you're following the imam's postures, that is not valid. This is called virtual prayer. So following the imam through the internet or TV receiver is not permissible. There are many reasons, but one of the most common reasons, in fact, this is not valid and permissible according to any of the madhabs, as far as I'm aware. Within the Maliki madhab, there is some kind of concession, but with specific conditions. But to my understanding, according to all of the madhabs, that's not permissible, not just the Hanafi madhab. And one of the primary reasons is because that one of the conditions for the congregant salah, the muqtadis, the people who pray salah behind the imam, the congregant salah to be valid behind the imam is that they all have to be in the same place. And the safs have to be interconnected. They all have to be connected, the safs. So even though there's 20, 30 safs, 40 safs, 50 safs, as long as there's a connection. And number two is that both the congregants and the imam, they're standing at the same place, in the same location. So the same location is necessary. The fact that because there's a big distance, and both the imam and the person that praying salah behind the imam, the fact that they're not praying in the same place, therefore that salah will not be valid. You have to pray salah at home individually, or congregating your own family members. And itikaf, you can perform itikaf the last 10 days. It's recommended, however, that people perform when they perform the last 10 days of itikaf, the sisters can perform it in their own homes. Men obviously cannot perform the itikafs in their own home, because that's only exclusive for women. But however, in the masjid, there should be at least one or two people to persons to perform the itikaf, so at least to fulfill the sunnah obligation. And this is what I just already mentioned regarding the Eid Salah, but however, is something that should not be normalized. Jazakumullah khair for that. We'll be willing to take any questions if there's need be. We have about 10-15 minutes. I do apologize that if we've run over time. If anybody does have any question related to Ramadan or anything that I just mentioned, please feel free to ask a question. Otherwise, you can post your question in the chat box. Post in the chat box if need be, then I'll address the question. So if anybody's got a question, if you can raise your hand, please. I think let me just see. Yeah, we've got one person who's raised their hand. Go ahead, please. Jay, I think it's Sister Lucy Wayne Jones. Do you have a question? Jay, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you clearly, sister. Go ahead.
Yes. I've got a friend who lives in China. We're in contact via WeChat, a social media network. I sometimes want to give her dawah and stuff, but it's just like I'm simultaneously scared that I could be putting her at risk. What is your advice?
So you want to give her dawah, for example, and you want to give her dawah, but what's the challenge though? What's the issue?
I'm worried that I could get her into trouble with the Chinese government
All right.
because they're very strict about religion and stuff, and they're very anti-religion. That's my
Okay.
concern.
All right. Okay. And in that case, I mean, what's her reaction to Islam? I mean, does she have an interest in Islam, or?
She's very curious about Islam, and I know that I know like the kind of dawah I give her is I tell her that I'm praying for her, my Muslim friends are praying for her. I know like she was in proper lockdown mode in the Hubei province.
All right, I see. Okay,
And I think that the virus is a good opportunity to give dawah, because I've said to a lot of non-Muslims out there that had people been doing what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to do, like not eat bats, which includes animals with fangs, and birds with talons, if that was not happening, then the virus would not have broken out. So I think that's a reason why I think it's a good opportunity to give dawah.
Ji, mashallah, yeah. Okay, mashallah, so very good. First of all, I would like to say that may Allah Ta'ala reward you for your kind efforts, for your noble effort for giving dawah to people. And it's something that, and because our religion Islam, it's because our religion Islam is a religion of dawah. It's a missionary religion that we give dawah to people. Right. However, so concerning the question itself, the giving dawah to a person in China, what I would recommend, if you can switch your mic off, please, Jazakallah. Yeah. So as I was mentioning now, concerning the question itself, what I would recommend is that you use wisdom and look at the circumstances very carefully. So there's no harm in you continuously giving dawah to the person, but only do it to the extent that you know that it's not going to jeopardize the individual. Because your job as sister, is to give them dawah, but at the same time, don't overburden this. Can you please mute your voice, please? Jazakallah. So if I can kindly request just give me a second. I'll just mute there. Yeah. So as I was saying, sister, is that what I would advise in this particular case is that when you're giving dawah to her, number one is don't overwhelm her with too much information. Number one. Number two, only give her to that much which is necessary for her, in light with the circumstances, knowing the fact that if you were to tell her to do something publicly, you know that it's going to cause her danger, then don't advise her to do that. What I would recommend is that when you're giving a dawah, give a dawah to those things which she can practice privately, not publicly. So for example, praying her salah. So wherever you're teaching her, at the same time, teach her to be precautious in what you do. So for example, when she's praying salah, so teach her to pray salah in a manner that which is secluded, which is not known for everybody else, okay? It's usually the time that where, if you were to get them to do something publicly, that gets them into trouble. Yes? I hope that makes sense. Where it gets them to, which usually gets them into trouble. As long as she is practicing Islam privately and not known to the government people, then inshallah that should be fine. So things like, for example, when she's doing the tasbih, then she shouldn't do the tasbih loud. When she's praying salah, she shouldn't be performing salah publicly. For example, when she's giving dawah, then she should not be giving dawah to people publicly, but rather everything privately. Just the way the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he in the first 3 years of his prophet, when he started preaching Islam secretly, so he would preach Islam secretly to his people, only to the close family members, and when they would worship in a secluded place. So take some examples from the early period of the early prophetic period, the first 3 years of the Prophet's period, and just to tell her just to be cautious. I mean, what happens to her after that, that's not in your control. Okay, you give her, your job is to give her the dawah in a limited way possible. In a limited way possible, but it's up to her now to take the responsibility to observe extra caution. Is that okay? I hope that answers the question. We had Sister Azra, you had a question? Sister Azra, okay. Brother Farooq, you have a question?
I had a question.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, Sister Azra. Brother Farooq,
It's just that I missed the program today. I came on very late.
Yeah.
Is there going to be a recap of anything, or will you send us the link?
Yeah, yeah. Basically, the program's been recorded. It's already recorded. So once it's gone through editing, and then it's gonna be posted onto YouTube, inshallah. Just whenever that's gonna be, probably the next 1 to 2 weeks. Okay. Well, the
Okay.
whole program's been recorded. Mufti has been recorded. Mine will be recorded. So inshallah, you'll catch up. So do you have a
Can I
question?
just, the tarawis for the the family members, especially the men,
Ji.
how is that going to be take place at home?
Well, okay, good question. How is the Tarawih Salah going to take place? I've already indicated to this. I'll just repeat it. Basically,
Okay.
Tarawih Salah should be performed in congregation. So if you're going to perform in congregation, then the way it's going to be, you're going to have the man, the male, and then behind the male, then you have the male congregants or children, or you will have the females. Okay. Okay. What I'll do is I'll just give me a second. If I open my whiteboard, just give me a second.
Okay.
What I'll do is I'll just share my okay, can you all see my whiteboard?
Ji.
Yes. So for example, if this is my whiteboard here, okay? So for those people who pray Tarawih Salah, so you have the Imam, okay?
Okay.
This is the Imam, okay? And behind him, you will have the congregations, okay? You have the men.
Okay.
It could be, sorry, actually, you know what? Let me just think it. So what you do is you have one person. If you have one person standing, whether it be a male, or a child, okay, they will stand there on the right hand side. If there's two people, then they will stand here. Yes, okay. If there's three people, they will stand here. Okay. If there's children, so this represents men. Okay, adult men. Okay. If it's children, then they will stand here. Okay. So this is children. And if it's female, if it's women, then they will stand here. They will stand at the back here. So they will line up here. Is that clear?
Ji.
If it's just for example, just a husband and wife, then the husband will stand here, and the wife will stand here. She will not stand here. She will not stand there. Okay, she will stand behind instead. If they have children, if there's a husband, family, or children, so it'll be like this. So you got the imam there. Then you have the children, and then you have the women. Those women, regardless whether they are adult women or whether they be baligha women, doesn't matter. They can stand here, or you can get the small children standing here. Is that clear?
Ji.
Yeah. So basically, this is how it is. So you have the imam there, and then you have the adult male, then you have the children, then you have the female. If it's husband or wife, then the wife just stands at the behind the husband. If it's the imam, then you have father, the children, and then you have the women, and then you have the nabaligha women standing at the back. So it just depends. Okay.
Ji. What about the Quran? If they're not Hafiz, can they read any part of the Quran in the?
Yes. If they're not Hafiz of the Quran, they could read any part of the Quran for 20 rakats. Even if it means if they want to read the last 10 surahs, it's up to them.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay. Okay, Brother Farooq, you have a question?
I do, Hazrat Tawfiq. Maybe my connection isn't the greatest.
It's okay.
Yeah, so basically the question is in relation to new Muslims. So alhamdulillah, there's a brother that accepted Islam a couple of months ago. Now with Ramadan coming, he's not fasted before, obviously not been exposed to fasting, he's still learning the religion. So I mean, is there any concessions available, and what would your advice be, and how would we go about obviously explaining it to him if possible? If you could just shed some light on that, inshallah.
Okay, good question. So somebody's basically asked the question related to how do you explain fasting to a non-Muslim, a person who just to a new Muslim, a revert Muslim rather, because he was actually born as a Muslim and so on. So our revert brother or sister, then how would you explain it to them? Now there's a couple of things I would recommend. First things first is that you teach them the fundamentals of fasting. So there's two things. Number one is what is fasting about, and why in Islam, why Islam enshrines fasting upon people. And number two, it's important that you teach them the conditions of fasting. So they need to be educated first. Okay, they be educated. In other words, how is fasting, the basic masail of fasting, what breaks the fast, what doesn't break the fast. Okay, so one is the aspect of educating them or what fasting is about. The second aspect of it is the practical aspect of it. Now is that how would you get them to practice fasting? Now, because it's something that is it's a new experience for them. The thing is that if they were to keep the fast, and if they were to break the fast deliberately or intentionally, then they would have to observe qada and kafara, because not having understanding of the rules of fasting, and neither not being used to fasting and breaking the fast, okay, does not necessarily give them the concession of not to keep the kafara. So you have to make that very clear to them. Okay, what they can do is that if they know that they're going to struggle to fast, okay, then they can trial just a few days, 1 day or 2 days. If that's difficult for them, then they can postpone their fast to the later date. So what I'm trying to say is that in terms of the practical aspect of it, that you should try to ensure that they do not break the fast. If they are going to struggle, and knowing the fact that they might struggle, then they have the concession that they can postpone their fast later on. Rather than keeping it and breaking it, they can just delay the fast later on. But as an initial stage, get them to fast a few days only. So the first day of Ramadan, get them to fast first day of Ramadan. If they can't fast the second day, then they miss the second day, then they fast for the third day, if like that. So they fast about 2-3 days in a week, just for them to get used to the fasting, and whichever day that they have missed, they make qada of that afterwards. So if you know that for them to fast every single day of the month of Ramadan is going to be overwhelming for them, because of the fact that, because the new Muslim, they may not be used to it because of the long hours and so on. If there's a fear, then you can get them to fast a few days of month of Ramadan and then make qada of them later on. But this is better than fasting and then breaking the fast, because if they were to break the fast intentionally, then according to the principles, not just qada, kafara will be necessary upon them. Is that okay? So there's two things. Number one is to educate them about fasting and about the basic rules and principles. And number two, when it comes to the practical aspect of it, then get them to practice the fasting slowly. If they can fast every single day, alhamdulillah, that's good. If not, then for them not to overwhelm themselves. I hope that answers the question. Is that okay?
Sheikh, yeah, just so basically, if they were to fast, and they were to fast a few days, and inshallah, like you mentioned, they're able to do it full 29, 30 days, alhamdulillah. But
Yeah.
say they begin fasting and they don't break the fast, they do 2 or 3 days and they're not able, when would they then make up the fast? Would it be maybe in the winter days, for instance, they'd make it up?
Yeah, just whenever, after the month of Ramadan, so whichever time, because there's no restricted time of where you have to make qada. You can do it any time, whether it be winter time, immediately after, whenever they can.
So they just make up the fast that they've missed. So whether
Yeah.
that be 10, 15 or whatever.
Yeah, that's it, correct. But just to be clear, that don't get them to fast and then break the fast, because if they do, they have to do kafara. Is that okay?
That makes sense. Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. Jazakallah.
There was another question. Sister, was it Kat Jabin?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Yes, brother, thank you for your talk. It's very useful. I have a question regarding the coronavirus. I just wanted to ask, what are your thoughts on the community who basically are basically rejecting modern medicine to help them recover and turning to herbal medicine? For example, they're saying if you take black seed, it will cure you, and they're completely rejecting modern medicine, even as far as not even wanting to go to hospitals for treatment, because unfortunately there's a lot of conspiracy theories going on, a lot of scaremongering about stories about the NHS staff. They're not actually looking after our elders, actually trying to basically kill them. what is your thoughts on this, and what is your advice to the community, and how can we help our elders and our community to really understand this virus and the help that we need to look after our elders in this, obviously, in this pandemic that we're going through?
All right. SubhanAllah is a very, very relevant question about this conspiracy theory, and I've actually been reading up about this a few days ago. Now, there's two aspects to this. So one is the conspiracy theory itself, and number two is the medicine part of it. So I'll address both of them separately. Now, in regards to the conspiracy theory, and you have to remember that conspiracy theorists, generally speaking, there's a whole psychology behind it, and there's a really good article that I actually read on a website. It's called Psychology Today. It's called psychologytoday.com, and there's some very useful articles. And in fact, there's a whole debate about this whole 5G, that is 5G connected to COVID-19. So I was reading a whole article on that. I don't want to go into the details of that. You see, there's a whole psychology behind conspiracy theorists, and what this psychology is many of them, they tend to be disenfranchised, i.e. they tend not to be accepted within the wider community, their statements and words. So some of the narratives that they come about, so let's say, for example, when they say 5G is the cause of, so 5G is the cause of the coronavirus, and it's got nothing to do with the bat transmission or things like that. It's a kind of narrative that they're trying to own so that they can gain wide publicity and validation amongst people. Yes. And there's a psychological there is a psychological problem here that's attributed to them. It's called the teleological thinking. It's an actual term. So this teleological thinking basically is you're trying to over attribute a cause to an event, over attributing cause to an event. In other words, that you're trying to like, for example, let's say, for example, this whole 5G. So you're trying to overemphasize the whole issue of 5G being the cause of the coronavirus, which is why there was a whole 5G tower that was burnt down quite some time ago in London or whatever. So the whole purpose of this is a kind of a panic or hysteria that's being overemphasized in trying to over-attribute a particular cause to an event. No, and these conspiracy theories, they're always obsessed that there's always obsessed the fact that there's a greater meaning behind a particular event that takes place. Greater meaning, there is a meaning that there's a greater meaning behind an event. So any event, for example, coronavirus, for example, that's taking place now, they're trying to give us some kind of explanation to say that there is a greater agenda behind this, so don't be fooled by this. Yes? So this is how conspiracy theories work. I'm not saying that all conspiracy theories are bad, but at the same time, not all conspiracy theories are good. Everything has to be based on facts. So one of the things that I said to my students is that when it comes to conspiracy theories, one rule we have to always remember, we have to go by, number one, factual information. Factual information. We believe in a conspiracy theory not because of conspiracy theories, but there are scientific basis for it, for example. So depending upon whatever the conspiracy theory is about, you have to refer to the experts in the field. In this case, for example, you have to look at scientists, you have to look at medical doctors, you have to look at, for example, not social scientists, computer scientists, for example, who are very familiar with this. You have to gather reliable information from reliable sources, from experts, for you to draw a conclusion whether something is true or valid or not. Not on the basis because it's said by conspiracy theories, but because there are evidences behind that. That's the first point we have to remember about conspiracy theories. Number two, to my understanding, is that this whole conspiracy about coronavirus and, you know, this whole vaccine that they're trying to come up with that's going to cause detrimental harm, from my understanding, is that there is no scientific basis based on what I've spoken to doctors and scientists and so on. Based on that, there is no scientific evidences or strong evidences to prove otherwise. On the basis of that, we just take it as it is, go by the advices of the government and the doctors and scientists, what they say. That's the second point. And the third point to remember, and the third point to consider, is that even hypothetically, if we were to assume that this is a whole conspiracy theory, the question is, what do we do about it now? Because again, this goes back to the same conspiracy theory psychology, is where that you become so over obsessed with with trying to attribute an event to a greater power, so-called greater power, it makes one despair and someone to lose hope, thinking that you can't do anything about it at all. Whereas what our belief from Muslim perspective is that everything happens to the will of Almighty Allah. Nothing happens except through the power of Allah. And many of these conspiracy theories, they fall into a trap of fear. So there's the fallacy of appeal to fear, what you call about fear mongering. So they appeal to fear. They start spreading this hate mongering or fear mongering amongst people. And there's a hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "La yahillu li muslimin an yurawwi'a musliman." It is not halal for a Muslim to frighten another Muslim. It is not halal for a Muslim to frighten another Muslim, because if you do that, this is exactly what fear mongering is. Because by fear mongering, you're making people lose hope, they despair, and they start questioning Almighty Allah. Goes back to the same point that I was saying, that they begin to question Almighty Allah. Why is Allah making this happen? Why is Allah allowing this to happen, and so on. Yeah, again, we're going to a different tangent here, but just to suffice to say that even if conspiracy theory hypothetically was to be valid, the question is now, what do we do about it? Islam is a practical religion and teaches us to do things practically. So we have to own the situation. That's the key thing. When you go down the path of conspiracy theory, you don't own the situation, which means you think is beyond your control. We have to own the situation, own the condition, and do whatever we can in our capacity. I hope that's clear. Now, when it comes to the case of medicines now, is that Islam has given, again, flexibility. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, "Tadawu ibadallah," that, "O servants of Allah, you seek medication, because there is no illness except Allah Ta'ala has created a cure for it, except for death or old illness." Two things which Almighty Allah has never set a cure for: one is death and one is old age. Apart from that, everything else there's a cure. So even it is my iman and my belief that for coronavirus there is a cure to this illness, inshallah. Now it's up to the person what avenue they take, whether they want to take pharmaceutical medicines or whether they want to opt for herbal medication. That's entirely up to the individual to the person. So there is no harm. So there is no harm in a person opting for whichever medication it may be, whether it be herbal medication, whether it be the doctor's advice medication. And we do that on our day-to-day basis anyway. Paracetamols, for example, we have a headache, we don't go to herbal medication, we go through paracetamols. For example, things like Calpol, for example, even for our children. So if most of us rely on pharmaceutical medications anyway, then I don't see the reason why people should refuse taking medication prescribed by doctors. So I don't see there is any point in that. But again, that's down to the individual's discretion, but whichever option they want to take. So I hope that answers the question, Sister Jabeen. Does that answer your question?
Assalamu alaikum. Yes, Jazakallah. It does, but I just want to clarify that, because there is a lot of misinformation going on, but they're completely relying on, for example, a black seed oil and saying that is the cure for all diseases. I mean, you can correct me, there's a hadith on this where Prophet ﷺ said it's a black seed cures all diseases except for obviously death. So people are taking that literally and rejecting help from NHS. This is where I was saying if you could just maybe, I don't know, give advice or clarify information around that, please.
So basically, the hadith what you quote is correct. But when the Prophet ﷺ said this, doesn't necessarily mean that that's the only medication a person needs to rely on. Okay, because black seed oil, it does have its own benefits in it. But in the field of medicine, whatever the Prophet ﷺ gave is in the field of medicine, it doesn't carry an obligatory command. It's not an obligatory command. So just because when the Prophet ﷺ said that the black seed oil has the cure for everything apart from death or old age, which we humbly accept of the Prophet ﷺ, that's not an obligatory command. Does not mean to say, it's not to suggest that because the Prophet said this, reject everything else. Because even for those people who promote this hadith, I will guarantee you on every other kind of illness, they do not wholly rely on black seed oil. They will somewhere, one way or another, they'll take Calpol, they take paracetamol, or they take any other ibuprofen, for example, they take any other medications. Nobody takes this hadith in this acts upon this hadith in this complete unconditional literal sense. It's impossible. You can't do that. Yes, but there shouldn't be so much of overemphasis because the hadith is not obligatory command. Okay, this does not discount or devalue the medications from scientists and so on. So as the sister mentioned, that it is permissible to emphasize that if somebody wants to use black seed oil, then that's fine, but there shouldn't be extremism. You shouldn't be over extreme in this regard. You can use other medications, and we have to maintain a balance in everything. Okay, there was somebody else asking a question. Did somebody else raise their hands? There was somebody else who raised their hands. I'm not sure who it was. Okay, we've got about 3-4 minutes. G, sister Shaina Durani raised hands. G, go ahead, sister. You have about 3-4 minutes. Okay.
Ji, assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Jazakallah for all the informative talk. I wanted to ask, I've got 3 girls, and if during the Taraweehs, I want to teach them to, to read Taraweehs, can I lead the Taraweeh prayer for my girls?
Okay, good question. So this is the question related to female gatherings. Okay, is it permissible for a mother to lead her 3 daughters in the Jamaat for Taraweeh Salah? Is that permissible or not? Now, there is difference of opinions amongst the scholars. In the Hanafi madhab, it is generally makruh for women to perform Salah in gatherings, congregation. Only the Hanafi madhab. The other madhabs, they allow it. And the rationale behind the Hanafi madhabs not allowing it is because primarily the Salah that's prescribed for a woman is individual Salah. Yes, that's the primarily. And the fact that because that is her primary concern, that's why it's like the case with the man. For the Fard Salah, for the Fard prayers, primarily, and all congregation Salahs, primarily they prescribe for a man. And it's disliked for a man to perform the Salah individually, where they have the option to perform the Salah in congregation. Okay, that's when the option arises. So with the women is the opposite. So for her, she must perform her Salah individually, not in congregation. If she, however, does do that, then the Salah is valid. We're not going to say the Salah is invalid. Her Salah is valid. Now, with the case of performing the Taraweeh Salah to teach the girls, to be honest with you, right, it depends on the age of the girls. If they're already baligh and they already know how to perform the Salah, for example, then you should avoid performing Salah in congregation so that you can reap the full reward of the Salah. If however, they're young children and they do not know how to perform the Salah, so they follow you, so you perform it in a gathering, so you perform Salah in a congregation, so to teach them how to perform the Salah, then that is okay, then there's some kind of flexibility in that. But just to be careful like that, this doesn't become a continuous practice. Only up until the time that when they are able to perform the Salah independently and perform the Salah themselves. However, if they're not able to perform the Salah by themselves and they're struggling because they may be about 5, 6 years or 7 years and they've not been taught how to perform Salah, Taraweeh Salah, then they join you in prayer just to copy you, then that's permissible, it's okay. But once they're able to perform the Salah, you can stand together in rows, but perform Salah individually. Does that make sense?
Ji, Jazakallah.
Okay, that's fine. TK, we'll just take one more question and we'll conclude, inshallah. I know we've gone over time, do apologize. Is anybody else asking a question? TK, that's fine. So what we'll do is we'll
Assalamu alaikum, Mufti Sahib.
Assalamu
alaikum. Just to go over your last question, the lady that asked about the Jamaat namaz. Is it best then for us to stand behind the men at home, or is it best to read separately then if it's makruh with the gathering?
With the gathering, good question. Now, with the gathering, remember when I talked about the gathering itself, okay, I'm talking about just purely female congregation, not the fact that a women pray Salah behind male. Okay, so for women to perform to join the congregation Salah, with men, that's not makruh. It's only the female congregation. So women congregate with the female imama. Okay, female imam. That's what's makruh. But otherwise, if you're praying Salah behind your husband, for example, behind a hafiz, then that's completely fine. That's not considered a makruh at all.
Okay. Jazakallah.
And Brother Farooq, you have one question?
Yes. If you have 2 young children, for instance, they're not baligh boys, and just to get them in the practice of obviously being able to recite the Quran, would they be able to lead their mother in Salah, for instance, if there was 2 or 3 boys in a household and they took turns in leading Taraweeh Salah? Would that be something that is permissible or not?
Okay, good question. So the question is that is it permissible for non-Baligh children to lead the Baligh in Salah? That's the question. Okay. Now again, there is difference of opinions amongst the ulamas and scholars within the madhab. In the Hanafi madhab itself, as opposed to the Shafi'i madhab and others, in the Hanafi madhab, the relied upon opinion is that it's not permissible for a non-Baligh child to lead the adults in prayer. And the reason behind that is because apart from there's a hadith and where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the conditions that establishing the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam only alludes to the fact that only adults can only lead the prayers. Number two, the reason is because that the Taraweeh Salah itself is a sunnah mu'akkada, and for a Nabalig child, Salah for them is nafil. So any kind of Salah, whether it be a Fard Salah, whether it be a Wajib Salah, whether it be a Sunnah Salah, is all counted as nafil. So for women to pray Salah behind a Nabalig child, okay, it's like it's the case of people, it's the case of the congregants, their Salah being of a higher degree than the Imams themselves, because the Imam Salah is nafil, and there's a clash in the Salah itself, because for the child the Salah is nafil, and for the congregants the Salah is sunnah, and sunnah is higher than the nafil, because this is the Imam, for example, and this is the congregants. It's always important that the status of the Imam Salah to be higher or equal than the congregants. If it's the case that where the congregants status of Salah is higher than the Imams, right, then that Salah will not be valid, because this Imam, the Salah for him is nafil, and the Salah for the congregants is a sunnah. Sunnah is higher. So therefore, that because due to the inconsistency and the clash in the status of the Salah, that Salah will not be valid. So therefore, as I mentioned, is that, you know, the Quran, I mean, one thing you can do is, you know, if a woman recites the Quran by herself, not in Salah, I'm saying, but just because the month of Ramadan is the month of the Quran anyway, so we should be reciting the Quran anyway. And if they want to listen to the Quran, they can always listen to the recitation of the Quran on internet and YouTube. That's fine. That's separate. But as far as Salah is concerned, it's not mandatory to complete the entire recitation of the Quran in Taraweeh for the Sunnah to be fulfilled. Okay, so I wouldn't advise people risking these risk in taking these options, so to invalidate the Salah, because it risks their own Salah. So my only suggestion is that if somebody is not hafid of the Quran, they just read whatever surahs they can in the Quran during Salah. They don't need to read behind a child who's not baligh. However, if they're baligh, then it's a different issue altogether. They can pray Salah behind them. And if it's the case of listening to the Quran, they can read the Quran by themselves individually outside of Salah, or they can listen to the recitation of the Quran, the entire recitation of the Quran outside of Salah. So basically, there are other avenues. Is that okay? Hope that answers the question. Okay, I've got one sister person here, Galaxy J4. Do you want to ask a question, please? Do you want to ask a question? Assalamu alaikum. Do you want to ask a question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Right, brother. I just want to ask. You said that Taraweeh Salah has to be in congregation only. I mean, I just want you to basically elaborate on that. I mean, what if I've got children in the house? I want to read individually, like men, boys, and girls.
Okay,
is it permissible?
No. The thing is that Taraweeh Salah doesn't have to be performed in congregation. It can be performed individually. Yes, it is sunnah to perform the Salah in congregation, but however, it's not mandatory. It's individually. Okay.
That's fine. Yeah, I just want to grab because of, like, you know, sometimes they just want to perform individually on their own.
Yeah, they can. Yeah, that's permissible. Completely fine. Even men, if they want to read it individually, even they can do that as well.
That's fine. Thank you. Jazakallah.
Okay, I've got this person A here. Sayyiduddin, you got a question?
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
Jazakallah for your time and the very important session. Just a quick question around witr and praying Tarawih at home. Over normally in Masjid, we would pray the 3 rakat witr with the Imam. So if you are praying Jamaat at home, Tarawih Jamaat, would we then also read the 3 rakat witr in Jamaat as well?
Good question. Yeah, so basically the question is that if the family members are performing Tarawih Salah in congregation, what about the Witr Salah? Yes, so it is Sunnah to perform the Tarawih Witr Salah in congregation. So yes, that's correct. So you can pray Tarawih with Witr Salah in congregation. Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu's time, Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu's time, they used to perform the Witr Salah in congregation. That rule will still apply, yes. Okay, we'll just take, I do apologize, we're going over time now, so we'll just take one final question. Okay.
Hello, Assalamualaikum.
Walaikum salam.
Just one quick question. Can you give food packaging to the poor who are liable for zakat from your zakat money?
Very good question, mashallah. What's your name, brother?
Abdurrahman.
Abdurrahman, mashallah. You asked a very good question. The question related to zakat itself, can you give zakat, can you give food package in the form of zakat money to the eligible people? Now, two things to remember. Number one, zakat is only eligible to a Muslim. Okay, non-Muslims are not eligible for zakat. However, non-Muslims are eligible to nafil, an optional sadaqah. Okay, so because zakat is fard, that's only enshrined for a poor Muslim. Okay, with non-Muslims, you can give them other optional ones. Okay, that's the first question, first point. The second point being that in regards to giving zakat, it's not necessary that you have to give it in cash form. You can give it even in food package, provided with the condition that the person that you're giving it to, you give them complete ownership. I'll just give you an example. Let's say that your zakat money is £5. Okay, you've got money. You got, let's say, about you've got about a few £100 in your bank account, and you calculated your zakat. Your zakat turns out to be £10. So your £10 zakat is your £10. So what do you do instead? You go to the takeaway and you purchase food that's worth £10. You don't get any change. Okay. So you say to the person that, look, give me £10 worth of food. So you purchase it, and then you get that money, you get that food, and you give it to the poor person individually. That is permissible. Your zakat is fulfilled. Your zakat is valid. So in short, zakat does not have to be given in a cash form. It could be given in a food form as well, provided with the condition that you're giving that individual person ownership to the food. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Ji, can I ask another question?
Okay, right. Go on.
What is the nisab level right now?
Good question. The nisab rate. I can't remember actually. I think it's about it's just over £200. Okay, I'll have to check now because the nisab rate keeps changing. I'll have to check, but it's over £200 or 250, £260 or something like that.
Okay, jazakallah for that.
Okay. Right. Okay. Okay. Brother Muhammad. Brother Muhammad, you have a question? Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Brother Muhammad.
Yeah.
This is the last question.
So just one question. For Tarawih at home, can women stand with the children in the same line in children? Because in every house doesn't have enough space to make 3 or 4 rows or more than 2 rows.
Okay, so the question is that can boys, young children stand alongside women? Now, the thing is with young children, those who are not baligh, okay, whose salah is not farz upon them, they can stand anywhere because salah for them is nafil anyway, right? Because salah is nafil for them anyway, they can stand whenever they can. It's only when they are baligh, then they cannot stand in the same line, they have to stand separately. Okay.
Jazakallah.
Okay, TK, I have to go now. My Surface Pro needs charging now, and we've come to an end to the session, and we've gone half an hour, at least about 35 minutes above. Jazakumullah khair for your participation. Inshallah, the recording will be available on internet very soon. And pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I pray that Almighty Allah ta'ala, He accepts our effort. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows upon us a very productive Ramadan. Give us the tawfiq to capitalize and utilize the month of Ramadan in the best way form, and pray to Almighty Allah, most importantly, to uplift this pandemic and to create ease for the people, whether they be Muslims or non-Muslims. Jazakumullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.